Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory. My name is TJ Hicks. I'm the program coordinator here. It's really great to see such a great crowd here this afternoon, and we've got a great program coming up. I'll be brief. I just have a couple of quick announcements. One is to just, if you haven't already, make sure you take your cell phone out and silence it or turn it off. The other reminder is that programs like today's do not happen without the support of our foundation, the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory Foundation. For the most part, all of our programming and our free programming is provided through donations that come in through that foundation, through the work of the board, and through really the community who chooses to support us. So I want to thank everyone who does do that and encourage you, if you're interested and you enjoy today's program, to consider maybe making a donation at some point. I also want to let you know about all of the great stuff we have coming up, because there is still a lot of stuff coming up this spring, including just this week. Tomorrow we have Doug McDonald and the Doug McDonald Trio, which will be great, jazz guitar. He'll be here at 7 p.m., so please join us for that. And then this Thursday we have Valerie Bertinelli coming, and she'll be speaking about her new cookbook, Indulge. So that should be a lot of fun. That is one of our Rancho Mirage Writers Series events, so it's what we call a premier event, which means Rancho Mirage residents do get priority seating, and we are expecting a very large crowd. So if you're interested, make sure you get here early, and the first 200 people into the room will receive a free copy of Valerie's new book. So we're looking forward to that. But now let's get on to today's show. This afternoon's presenter, Dr. Edward Gordon, is an internationally known historian, author, and speaker. For over 20 years, he taught at DePaul University, Loyola, and Northwestern universities in Chicago. In addition to authoring over 20 books and 150 articles in the area of history, business, and education, he has given history presentations at museums, universities, and libraries across the country. And this is actually the fourth time he's spoken here at Rancho Mirage Library, but it's been over 6 years since he's spoken. So we're very pleased to have him back today. So today he'll share with us the story of what has been called the greatest theft in recorded history, a saga that continues today, nearly 80 years after the conclusion of World War II. So please help me welcome Edward E. Gordon.
Here is Adolf Hitler. He's looking at a model of a museum that he intends to build in Linz to hold the 40,000 art treasures he stole during the Second World War. This is the story of the greatest art theft ever in history by anyone or any country. It is also the story of the early recovery efforts, and now today, the continued effort to restore art to its legitimate owners. All of his life, Adolf Hitler considered himself to be an artist. And because he failed as a youth to get into an art academy, he decided to go into politics. Would history have been any different or any worse? This is a watercolor of the Civil Registry Office in Old Town Hall of Munich. He painted it in 1914. It was auctioned off for $161,000 in 2014 to a Middle East collector. This is among the 2,000 watercolors that Adolf Hitler painted. Now, even before the war, Hitler had started to steal art from the countries he occupied across Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. In Leipzig, on July the 18th, 1937, Hitler had built a German art house, and he had a show of German art here in this museum. Here he is leading a group through this temple of Nordic art, which was basically a nonsensical Nazi racist idea of what art looked like. Well, you can see who he thought was worth putting in the art. Classic German Nordic artworks. The show was a flop. Hitler bought most of the art for his future museum in Linz. But at the same time, the Nazis put what they called the degenerate art in a rundown warehouse a few blocks down the street. Over 100 artists, Monet, Cézanne, Pissarro. For 5 months, 2 million people flocked to this art show. The Nazis were absolutely incensed by this and shut it down. Unfortunately, they destroyed 1,000 paintings and 3,000 drawings at that time across Europe. Then they realized the great value this art had, and they went on and sold it. This helped to finance the so-called German economic miracle and also the Nazi rearmament program. This is Hildebrand Gerlit. He was Hitler's personal art procurer, and he and other art dealers acquired art by stealing it, buying it, knockdown prices from across the entire Europe, and then reselling it to people in Europe, and some of it, unfortunately, ended up here in the United States. 25% of the resources that the Germans used to fight the Second World War came from the sale of art. The Germans confiscated treasures from individual museums, churches, galleries, governments. Actually, anything that was not nailed down that they wanted, they took. Before the Nazi invasion of Western Europe, many of the main museums, like the Louvre, tried to hide art and also to protect it from bombing. So in England, the Netherlands, Italy, and elsewhere, the remaining art that they sought to protect was hidden. Now, by June of 1940, the German army had crushed the French army and had occupied Paris. They established a so-called Arts and Monument Protection Office to then centralize all this art. This is a picture of Field Marshal Gert von Rundstedt, who commanded the German forces that conquered France. He was an officer in World War I and saw the rape of Belgium and what the Germans did. He was determined this time that this artwork would be protected. So the Germans placed all these art treasures in the Louvre that they took from other parts of France. And once they filled that, they put it in the Jeu de Paume. I'm sure many of you have been in both the Louvre and Jeu de Paume, tremendous museums. They then surrounded these sites with German troops. This also occurred at the chateaus in the Loire, and even in Bordeaux, the famous museum and chateaus and famous vintages, to protect this art from anyone stealing it. Now, until the Second World War, here is good old Napoleon. And Napoleon had been the record art thief before that time. He stole the Rosetta Stone from the Egyptians, and then, of course, somehow that was stolen by the British. And how many of you have seen it in the British Museum? Right. Of course, if you've been to Venice, you've seen the 3 horses on St. Mark's Cathedral that he stole from them. Of course, originally they stole it from the Byzantines in Constantinople. So on and on it goes, doesn't it? Hitler was determined to circumvent the Germans' army protection program. He established the ERR, the Ezra Stassel Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, to regulate so-called abandoned art in order that it could be saved and protected. This became the Nazi art confiscation program that was used across Europe that raped Europa. Here is some of the order rank of the 5 protectors who would save this art. You can see who's at the top of the list. The Nazis were very infatuated with art because of Hitler's infatuation with art. Here at his 50th birthday party is Himmler presenting Hitler with a piece of protected art. It's a portrait of his favorite war hero, Frederick the Great of Prussia. In fact, this ended up in Hitler's bunker in Berlin in 1945. The art that was not confiscated was bought using inflated Reichscurrency. Hitler then began to amass this huge collection of 40,000 pieces of paintings and other art objects. Gerlit and the other Nazi art dealers roamed Europe buying confiscated art and stealing whatever they couldn't get. Hitler therefore acquired more art. He decided he would build the art museum of all time. And here it is, Hitler's Führer Museum that would be built in Linz, Austria, near the site of his birth. It would be larger than the Louvre. It would be 3 times the size of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. How many of you have been in the Hermitage? How many of you have seen all the art in the Hermitage? No, it's impossible. As Hitler armies advanced across Europe, he gave them more opportunities to seize enemy alien art, now for his museum. So Linz was slated to become the cultural capital of the new Nazi Europe. Here are a few highlights from the so-called Hitler collection: 40,000 artworks, including 8,000 paintings. Maybe you know this one by Vermeer, one of his most famous paintings of the astronomer. The early Michelangelo, the Madonna of Bruges. And here, of course, is a very famous Ghent altarpiece. My wife and I just had the opportunity to see it. It is truly a magnificent piece of art. A Da Vinci piece. Rembrandt. And here is a piece from Raphael, a portrait of a young man. Unfortunately, this painting has never been recovered since the Second World War. We don't know where it is. Now, these were all in a picture book of 41 art albums that were specifically designed to show all of these wonderful paintings for Adolf Hitler. Now, why did they do this? Why did they collect art? Well, of course, he was obsessed with art, and he wanted to prove the purification and promote German culture with correct art. It inspired, therefore, all of the collecting of people such as Göring and others. And the idea was to impress him with their good taste. So all the Nazis were involved in these art thefts. Now look at this slide very carefully. Here is a photo of the 101st Air Division right outside Hermann Göring's art hoard that had been put on display at Berchtesgaden. This was Hitler's Bavarian retreat in southern Germany in the mountains. This was after the war was over. In addition to art theft, Göring, of course, amassed a huge collection of his own in addition to Hitler. And he, of course, commanded the German Air Force, and he was Hitler's heir apparent. Göring was not an unpleasant fellow. He would arrive at the Jeu de Paume and elsewhere on a palatial train. He had an oversized bathtub and phalanxes of elegantly uniformed adjutants. Göring himself was restrained only a bit, but he wore so many medals on his jacket that the people quietly said that the decorations read, "Continued on the back." This picture is Göring showing one of his paintings to an admiring Hitler of some of his loot. On the second visit to the Jeu de Paume, the confiscations continued apace. Truckload after truckload was shipped from there to Germany. Clocks, statues, paintings, jewelry, furniture, you name it, he got it. Here is the Jeu de Paume. He first arrived there in 1940. The selection was staggering, eclipsing whatever he had stolen from Holland previously. He chose 27 paintings in his first trip, Dutch and French. Here's one by Rembrandt, another by Van Dyck, the portrait of a lady. Two more of the Göring collection, Rubens, and of course, wonderful Fra Angelico. The Nazis hunted specifically for Rothschild masterpieces with particular diligence. They, of course, pronounced them all abandoned, and they confiscated over 5,000 paintings from the Rothschild collection. Vermeer's, Raphael's, Rembrandt's, Rubens, Titian's, on and on and on. So where did Göring host? Where did he put all of this? He was stylized as a hunter, as you see from this, a sportsman. So he built a small hunting lodge for himself. Cairn Hall was enormous. It was his favorite of 8 houses that he owned. He displayed his protected art on the walls of his hunting lodge. Here's another sample of art from the Goring collection that we'll go through briefly just to show you the importance of it. Rembrandt, Renoir, Picasso. But Goring was also very gullible. In this book, The Forger's Spell, it's a book about a Dutch work of art. It was featured and written by Hans van Meegeren, who was an art forger. He specialized in fakes, particularly of Vermeers. And the reason why there were very few Vermeers painted, that artist took a great deal of time and trouble to create these masterpieces. So he periodically would create a Vermeer that would then become, quote unquote, discovered. He successfully sold this fake Vermeer to Hermann Goring in trade for 137 paintings. After the Second World War, Meegeren was being tried for being a collaborator and had been living a life of Riley, a wonderful lifestyle, until they brought an art expert in to look at this painting during his trial. And he looked at it and he said, well, that's a fake. Suddenly, Vermeer became a great hero because he had fooled all these Nazis by selling them garbage. I should tell you, though, that that painting sold for $23,000. So here now is a coverage of what the Goring collection included. The stolen art by the Nazis required many trains stuffed with stolen goods. Here's a map. At the end of the war in 1945, Goring shipped from his hunting lodge to the so-called National Redoubt at Berchtesgaden. That's where the Nazis were supposed to make their last stand. Have any of you ever been in Berchtesgaden or gone to the Eagle's Nest? You can still see the Eagle's Nest. The rest of it was bombed out at the end of the war. Well, the Nazis did not make their last stand there. The train reached there, sat in a siding, was pilfered by local Germans until the army stopped it. But during the war years, the Nazi art hoard was shipped to many locations, including this, Neuschwanstein, a very famous castle built by mad King Ludwig of Bavaria. Hitler chose this site personally, but there were so many things stolen that they needed many depositories. This is a map of the salt mines that were used to store the art. Now, why a salt mine? Well, the reason is that the humidity and temperature would be at a very constant level. And also, if the salt, if it gathered on the painting itself, it could be easily wiped off, and therefore the salt actually helped to preserve these paintings. Now, on June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. By August 8th, they were nearing Paris. By then, the Germans had raided 72,000 dwellings and had 30,000 rail cars carrying loot back to Germany since the war began. Now, this included what you see here, the gold bars of the National Bank of the Netherlands. In 1944, the Allies appointed a Monuments Commission of Art. They were to track down the art and return the Nazi confiscated art to its rightful owners, either to, and they were made up of art experts, conservators, architects across Europe and from the United States. So now these individuals worked with the Army personnel teams, usually one expert with a team of non-experts, not as you saw in the movie The Monument Men, where there were 2 or 3 of them together. That's not how they worked. They worked solo. But they were also called by the Army the Venus Fixers, In other words, the people who would find the Venus paintings and return them. So they followed this three-step program or process to undo the massive art theft by Germany during all of those years. So the first step involved gathering this into repositories. Some were large castles, but there were 109 depositories where the Germans had stashed this art across Europe. Hard to believe, isn't it? And this included billions of dollars in gold, rooms piled high with canvas bags crammed with paper money, precious stones, barrels filled with silver and gold watches, even the wedding rings of people who had died at Auschwitz. It's very ghastly. As the Nazis gathered the art, their records, which they kept, showed the staggering magnitude of the German operation. The more they learned, the less sympathy they had for the Germans. The Third Reich wartime version of looting was different than any previous in history because it was officially planned and expertly carried out to enhance the fractured culture of the so-called master race. Well, Patton's Third Army, racing across Germany, arrived at the town of Meekers, and in Meekers was the Kaiser soda mine. The local women told them, this is where the gold bullion is. Well, they went down there and they found this stuffed with the German gold reserves. After a few soldiers made off with some coins, Patton surrounded it with 700 men and machine guns. Pictured here is Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton inspecting the mine, some of the paintings. They went down deep into the earth on a cable, a elevator with one cable. Patton joked, well, you know, if this cable snaps, that wipes out the leadership of the U.S. Army. Eisenhower told him to shut up. Well, here's the castle back again, intact, well guarded, 1,300 paintings containing Rothschild jewels and other treasures. But best of all were the EER records in 20,000 catalog cards that showed where all the art was. On May 8, 1945, Patton's Third Army reached the Alt-Ossa mine. This was the mother lode of all sites. It showed the magnitude of the Nazi repository. It eclipsed every other that they had seen. In a locked room measuring 200 by 30 feet, 600 high-quality paintings from different museums, manuscripts of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. Another room contained 6 cases of gold and silver relics of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, the robe of the Virgin, and the rest of the Cologne Cathedral's treasures. In just one room in the Alt-Osse mine was stored this unbelievable stash, and on and on and on this went. Now, in post-war Europe, they faced 4 major problems. Who owns it? Second, they needed a ruling by the Allied Commission on how to repatriate it. And in the end, the order was the works of art would only be returned to the government of an allied nation when evidence submitted to our representatives conclusively establishes the identity of particular works of art. Second, where are you going to store all this? Most of the museums in Europe were bombed out shells. They couldn't return it to the museums. And third, where do you return all this gold? Look at the amounts. It took time to properly identify and ship all this gold stock to the legal owners. As you can see, there is about $2 billion worth still unaccounted for. And the scope of stolen art, we're just not talking about pictures. We're talking about unbelievable amounts. Take a look at all of, let's go back. Take a look at all of the different pieces that we're dealing with. 700,000 items were stored in the Wiesbaden Museum collecting site alone. 700,000. Now, here was the solution. The solution was, at least for the time being, an order by General Eisenhower to ship 202 of the most important paintings from the Berlin Art Museum collection to America for an official tour of American cities. Now, the monument officers protested, saying, well, this is just duplicating what the Nazis did. We're going to steal it again. Not so. The 202 collection, as it was called, first appeared at Washington's National Gallery. I'm sure many of you have been there. The exhibition opened on March 17, 1948. 1 million people passed through it before it closed. It was dubbed Westward Ho, the collection of paintings by Rembrandt, Hals, Raphael, Vermeer, Rubens, then toured all these cities across the United States. Shipped to Chicago's Art Institute, and I'm the treasurer of the Cliff Dwellers Club in Chicago, which is an arts club perched on a rooftop 22 floors above, right across from the Art Institute. The opening day, an Army band played light classical music for the crowds. The 202 tour of 14 U.S. cities during 1948-49 attracted 2.5 million people. The paintings were all returned to Germany on May 14, 1949, to the Wiesbaden Depository. But it was not until 1958 that they arrived in the divided city of West Berlin. Remember, Berlin was partitioned. How many of you have been in Berlin? How many of you have gone to Museum Island and seen the Nefertiti? All right. The problem, of course, that was all in the Eastern Zone, the Soviet zone. So they were not going to return this art to the Soviets because you know what would have happened to it. It would have disappeared. That's right. Now let's turn to restoration. Restitution. Here is Marie Altman, who remembers in the 1930s visiting her uncle, Ferdinand, in their home in Vienna. And in a bedroom was a picture of her aunt. She always admired this picture of the aunt, the Golden Adele by Klimt. You can see that today in an art gallery right across from the Metropolitan in New York. In 1938, the Nazis they annexed Austria, and then they annexed these paintings and many others. Maria had fled to California later, and after the war, she discovered that the Golden Adele now was in the Austrian National Gallery in Vienna. I've been in the Austrian National Gallery, though I must admit at the time I wasn't looking for the Golden Adele. In 1999, she sued for recovery. Her case was ultimately tried by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2004, it was decided by arbitration to return the painting, and in 2006, it was placed on display at the New Gallery in New York City, right across from the Met. Now, at that time, the Washington Conference on Principles on Nazi Confiscation met for the first time to come up and expedite just and fair solutions for the victims of Nazi persecution. However, the treaty signed by 44 nations lacked the force of law. By 1998, an art loss register listed over 700,000 items in its database. Let's now examine some recent successes and failures behind the recovery of Nazi art. Well, here is Cornelius Gurlitt, the son of Hildebrand Gurlitt, Hitler's art dealer, and he was discovered owning a hoard of 1,500 paintings hidden in his German apartment. These works included Chagall, Matisse, and others. And Gurlitt maintained that he had legally owned all of these pieces, that none of them had been confiscated by the Nazis. One of the most valuable was The Woman with a Fan by Matisse, valued at $20 million. Gurlitt died in 2014. In his will, he left these paintings to a Swiss museum. The Swiss and German government disputed the potential owners. In 2016, an art task force identified 231 works that belonged to German museums, but they were only able to identify only 5 items belonging to private individuals and return them, including this one. Oops, there we go. Riders on a Beach by Max Lieberman. Here is a GI in 1945, Sergeant Harry Esterlinger. He poses with a Rembrandt painting in a German mine. 55 years later, an older Harry now poses with the lost art treasure that had finally been returned to the art museum. Only took 55 years. All right. This Van Dyck portrait was bought by Goring in 1956. It was published by a German foodstuffs company. Under German law, the original Jewish owners must rely on the goodwill of the private owners to return an art object. Only museums under the International Washington Principles are required to reach just and fair solutions in returning Nazi stolen art objects. This does not include corporations or private collectors. Also, there's a statute of limitations and other defenses in different countries, so they will not return Nazi stolen art to even documented, proven original owners. In 2020, the Louvre hired Dr. Emmanuel Pollock, a French art historian, to review the Louvre's collection for stolen art. Over 1,700 pieces to survivors and heirs, and the French government still has sold thousands more and kept the money. The paintings left in many museums today are sometimes known as orphans. Returning lost art often turns on whether Jewish heirs can offer proof of sale that was forced under the wartime anti-Jewish laws, making it an illegal act. This was often the result of a forced auction of art. Pollock had a Jewish grandfather who perished at Buchenwald. In 2017, a Digital Innovation Center at the University of Maryland inaugurated an enhanced international research fund to have records of stolen art from the Nazi era, which allowed searches online against participating members of the original portal. This is now housed in the European Holocaust Research Center. Let's review a few more stories of art restitution. Here is a bust of the goddess Diana by Houdon. It was stolen by the Russians in World War I in 1920. It was stolen again by the Nazis in 1939. In 2014, a Vienna auction house discovered it after a private person wanted to sell it. The Diana was returned to Warsaw in 2015, where it was in the museum. However, 63,000 other art objects that were stolen from Poland have never been returned. In 1530, the Nuremberg clock, a goldsmith, Wengel Gementar, who lived near Albert Durr, decorated this clock with a casing of gold and bronze, covered with intricate high reliefs depicting the scenes from the legend of Orpheus in the underworld. It is one of the world's most valuable clocks. In the book, The Orpheus Clock, the author, Simon Goodman, details his battle to return this clock held by the Dutch government to his family that originally owned it. They were asked in the end to repay what the Nazis gave in payment for the clock. They did get it back. They also chronicle in the Orpheus Clock their struggle in seeking the return of this Degas painting. This Degas painting was found in the Art Institute of Chicago. It had been bought by the Cyril family. The Cyril Drug Company they own. They disputed the claim. Ultimately, they arbitrated it, and a sum was paid to the Goodman family, and now the painting is on display in the Art Institute, but with the Goodman's name on it. Here is a picture of Goodman and his brother holding up one of these lost treasures, this landscape with haystacks. Richard Newman was forced to sell this art in Vienna in 1942. The Nazis seized the work for the Führer Museum in Linz. In 2017, it appeared in a Sotheby's sale in London. The family reached out to the owners and arranged to acquire it. So that was a big success. Now, the Graf family, another, fled Vienna in 1938. This painting was confiscated by the Nazis in 1940 and sold at an auction. It then disappeared until it was purchased in 1952 by Edward Spielmann. In December of 2016, the Grafs and Spielmann Trust came together and was auctioned in London in 2017. In many cases, the families, when they acquire these objects, they are not rich people. So where are they going to house this? In their house? What about the insurance to protect it? So many times they will sell it and also have it displayed in the museum in their family name. In 1935, the Nazis confiscated Max Liebermann's painting of his wife, Martha. He had been the chairman of the Academy of Arts of Berlin, but of course he was thrown out because he was only a Jew. His wife commented and committed suicide to avert the death camp. After World War II, Göring, he had bought the painting, and then it was sold and found in a museum. After a decade-long dispute, it was agreed to pay a sum, an undisclosed sum, to the heirs. In 1939, the Lily Cazever family was forced to sell this Pizarro's Rue de Saint-Honoré to the Nazis for $360 and a visa to get out of Germany. In 1993, the Spanish government placed this in a Madrid museum. It was insured for over $10 million. In 2015, the U.S. District Judge ruled that under Spanish law, the museum is the rightful owner. However, Spain supports international agreements to achieve, quote, fair and just solutions for Nazi persecuted art. So it went to a court of appeals. In 2019, they lost that case. In 1998, the Washington Principles of Nazi confiscated art, of course, said that it should be returned, etc. However, a California district court pointed out that it cannot force the Spanish government to comply with its moral commitments, since pacts as the Washington Principles are only as enforceable as its signatory governments, and their museums or others care to make them. So as you see, there are many loopholes. Robert Loewenstein in 1940 was forced to auction off this Gdański painting in Amsterdam. In 2018, the Dutch Restitutions Commission rejected his heir's claim, saying the sale motivated was unclear, and the work had a significant place in the museum where it was in the Netherlands, so they would not return it. In 1939, the Mendelssohn family was forced to sell this Picasso work to a Berlin art dealer. They were relatives of the famous composer Felix Mendelssohn. In 2010, they asked the Bavarian Modern Art Museum to return this painting. They refused. The heirs filed a lawsuit in the United States. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a lower court's ruling that Bavaria was entitled to sovereign immunity. This is not good, since it was now the German state defying the International Commission on Nazi Art Confiscation and their own central government. In Zurich, Switzerland, is the largest art museum in the country. It has an extensive collection of Impressionist paintings. The once were owned by a Swiss industrialist who was forced to sell under Nazi pressure. Between 1936 and 1956, the museum bought over 600 artworks, some lost from Jews and from others as well that were confiscated. And in 1948, the Swiss Supreme Court ordered 13 pictures returned to Jewish owners. Pictured here is a Cézanne work, Landscape in Provence. It was forced purchased by the Nazis. Now, the Burrell Foundation that owns the rest of the art rejected the request for return since the person living in Switzerland after fleeing Germany, there was no persecution in Switzerland, so they refused to return the art. At least 20% of the artwork currently for sale in Europe was stolen during the Second World War. They have not been returned to the original owners, adding to the complexity of restitution. And in there is the hidden art being held that we don't know about. A good example of this is David Wildenstein's family, pictured here. For over 150 years, they have amassed an art collection worth billions. Now, much of this is in vaults owned by them, and the artwork in it has been reported missing. Part of the collection is held at a Geneva free port, a prison-like complex of high security storage, containing more art than the Louvre. Independent of any jurisdiction, free ports allow traders to ship and store property without paying taxes or custom duties. If a dealer plans a painting in one country to buy a painting, he can ship it to a free port without paying import taxes. Then when he is offered the right price, he can sell it there without paying capital gains. It has been estimated that $100 billion worth of art and collectibles is being held in Geneva Freeport alone. This says nothing about the Freeport in Zurich, Luxembourg, Singapore, Monaco, Delaware, or Beijing. The Wildensteins' ruthless instincts often contribute to this dark aura, as one dealer put it, that would come to surround their name. Hitler's personal curator told an Allied intelligence agent in an interrogation after the war that this family did brisk business with the Nazis after fleeing to Provence, since they were Jews. But they were in the unoccupied zone of France. Once there, they helped the Germans locate Jewish collectors in occupied France in exchange for protecting their own collection. Profits from this newly Aronized gallery in Paris were said to be sent to New York. There, they opened a branch. In the basement, officers discovered recently vaults filled with hundreds of drawings, paintings, and sculptures, some of the frames inscribed with swastikas. Officers seized about 30 lost works by the likes of Degas, Marcerat, and others. Some have been stolen from Jewish families during the war. Others were lost. Others, for this family pleaded total ignorance. They said they never inspected the vault. And who could prove otherwise? The family also took pains to protect their inventory that no one knows what they really have. Perhaps they don't even know. Quote, many of these very rich families do sort of act like cartels, a lawyer says, who is involved in recovering lost art. We're still dealing with these Nazi-looted art cases because the art market hoped they would outlast the heirs. Now, the good news. The World Jewish Restitution Organization and the United States the State Department convened a special event on March 5th, 2024, at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Washington Conference Principles. This event focused on 2024 agreements, the best practices for the Washington Principles. First, it clarifies what just and fair solutions means. The claims of victims of the Holocaust and other victims of Nazi persecution and their heirs are first and foremost in these negotiations. Second, it defines more precisely what is considered Nazi-looted art, because there's such a variety of material that was stolen. Third, it urges countries to boost their provenance research and restitution efforts. Fourth, it clarifies what constitutes a sale under duress by stating that any art sale by a persecuted person during the Holocaust era between 1933 to 1945 can be considered an equivalent to an involuntary transfer of property based on the circumstances of the sale. Fifth, it encourages governments to set up independent expert bodies in which unilateral access is available. That is, claims regarding art and cultural property can be submitted without the consent of the current owners. It would be as if someone ransacked your house and you had to get the gangsters' permission before you could take them to court. Sixth, it exhorts countries and institutions to establish central contact points to provide information, advice, and help on any inquiry regarding art, records, archives, and claims. Now, finally, here's a rating of how well countries have abided by these Washington Principles. What this does not mean is that it's perfect, such as in the case of Germany, in Bavaria, the Bavarian government has basically stonewalled the return of art. But if you take a look at Russia and others, you will see that many other countries are doing little or nothing. So, today, the quest continues daily for justice in the rescue and return of Nazi-stolen art. We hope that the harshest light of public exposure through a variety of media and this program and court cases will provide increased motivation for justice in the return of this pilfered art to their original owners and to all of their heirs. Thank you very much. Now, questions? I'll try to repeat the question so that all of you can hear it. Go ahead.
In just approximate terms, what percentage of the art has been returned to the original owners?
I would say, at best, 25%. At best. At best. But remember again, that when the art is returned, many of them don't keep it because it's just too expensive to guard it, and it's better to be placed in a museum where it can be, but they will get some form of restitution by selling it. Yes, ma'am.
You gave us a lot of information.
Yes.
Is your script available online for those who would like to kind of reread it and mull it over?
Okay. I do have a bibliography of works that you can, the question was, well, now this program will be on YouTube, so you can look at it, but I have a bibliography of books and materials that you can read that will give you even more detail. But the human interest stories are incredible, particularly what the children and grandchildren have done. And I wish to also point out to you that many of these art objects were stolen not only from Jews, but by anyone in Europe that had them. Anyone. You're welcome. Yes.
The father and the two sons, Wildenstein and the Freeport, have they ever attempted to prosecute them in any way?
Yes.
And what happens?
They're still litigating. You know, appeal, 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 deny, deny, deny. Okay. Yes, over there. Yes, you, ma'am.
When the Nazis did their meticulous record keeping, did they put the source of the art?
Yes, in many cases they did, but not in all. And they maybe have put down the piddling amount of money that they paid. Supposedly, when they paid people for the art, it was going to go into this Jewish fund, which of course was a myth, all right? Yes, because all those people were murdered. Other questions? Now, the people in the back of the room, I hope you're ready for the test, because I have multiple choice, essay, or fill in the blank. You get a choice. But any other, now, I want to thank this library for having me back. I hope I'll be back next year here. I'll be at the Palm Springs Air Museum for 5 programs next year, and other venues, since many groups, I'm happy to say, have listened to my ramblings and have asked me to speak for them as well. And I do programs across the United States for many groups on many history topics. And if that interests you, I'll give you some information on my little website for the 90 programs I have developed. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.